Since the beginning of communication, there have been millions upon millions of stories told. And the interesting thing is they've all been the same story. That is a bit of an exaggeration, but surprisingly, it's not too far from the truth. There's a formula to it, to writing, and you'll find that this formula is called story structure. And the thing about story structure is you should be breaking it whenever you can. After my years as a film student, as a prospective director and writer, as a watcher of film, reader of books, listener of stories, I've learned that this structure is everywhere. I've learned how to write with it, and I've learned how to see it in other people's work. And today, I'm going to be telling you why you should be making an effort to consciously break this structure. But what is story structure exactly? And I know that story structure sounds like a very general term, but it actually refers to something very particular. To reference my professors again, there are only a handful of stories to tell, and they all fit into this structure. The most famous book to talk about this idea, in fact, is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. In this book, he describes various world myths from cultures that have never interacted up to this point in which these myths were created. And each of those myths have the same basic story. And he dubbed this story the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is just a more broken down version of story structure. It's everywhere. It's unavoidable. You'll see it in almost every story you ingest. And given everything I just said, why should you be breaking it, you know? You'll find that even daring to break this structure, your story might end up worse for it. General pacing issues in a lot of films, and a lot of very amateur films, are generally because of breaking the structure, of poorly writing out the structure, of not following it. But on the other hand, some of the most well-regarded films of all time have broken the structure. Let's take Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. It's very famous for its nonlinear storytelling. And that nonlinearity is an example of that story structure, of traditional story structure being broken. And the film is much more exciting because of it. People have put the sections back into order, and it doesn't have the same feel to it. And Tarantino actually accidentally kind of came across this when he was making it. He didn't go out to intentionally write it out this way, but you can use other people's discoveries to force your own work into being more interesting and have a bit more life to it. But how do you break this mold anyway? Well, the key thing is to know story structure like the back of your hand. The best way to break it in a professional manner is knowing exactly what it is, knowing how to see it. And once you know what the rules are, then you can break them. And breaking the rules frees you up a lot. Like I said, story structure fits into almost everything. And when it's everything, it's formulaic. And forcing yourself into a specific formula can bog down your writing in a degree. You feel like you need to hammer out each event like it should be. But letting yourself break the rules when writing, it gives you more of a natural flow. But how do you break this mold? Well, the best way to break the mold is to understand story structure like the back of your hand. You need to know the ins and outs, the rules of this structure if you want to break it in a more professional manner. Not knowing and just going free form with it all the way definitely can be amateurish if you don't know how you're proceeding. But knowing the ins and outs will let you break the rules in ways that are fresh but aren't weird to the audience or jarring. Your story also must still have a structure. Um, Even in Pulp Fiction, there is a little prologue, one bit, one bit, one bit, and it's still structured in a certain way. In another film that also doesn't quite follow traditional story structure, the French New Wave film Cleo from 5 to 9, it doesn't follow the general story structure, but it still has a flow to it, a natural progression from segment to segment. So if you are going to break the structure, you must be able to replace it with a different structure. And maybe the best way to really describe this whole process of breaking it is more of a remix. You can shuffle around the parts of story structure and still have a pretty effective story. As we've seen with Pulp Fiction and Cleo from 5 to 9, they aren't free form. They still do have this structure, but you can shuffle around the different bits and pieces of story structure to pretty great effect. Story structure is often looked at as a series of events that happen in the story in 3 acts, and for most things it is, but the individual pieces that make it up can be shifted. And understanding this process can really free up your writing. It can give you a burst of creativity that makes the difference between giving your story life and making it just another story out there. And I'll leave it on that. Thank you.